Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, former UN ambassador, former thorn in the side of Donald Trump and presidential candidate, has said she will vote for Donald Trump for president of the United States.
As a voter, I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border, no more excuses, a president who would support capitalism and freedom, a president who understands we need less debt, not more debt. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump.
I will be voting for Trump. Poor old Nicole Wallace, who peddles Trump fear porn on MSNBC, and I think if she was honest about it, hopes that something bad happens to him. She's just upset.
Birds to explain this, because with what you're reporting, it doesn't make a lick of sense to me, and it's so recent. I mean, J.D. Vance in 2015 said something similar, but for her and her husband to both been feuding publicly with him just days and weeks before endorsing him is inexplicable to me at a human level.
How does politics work? What? Okay, and notice she wears like constantly now, like funeral black on MSNBC, like she's at a constant funeral. Here's the problem. This is Dan Goldman, member of Congress. Listen to how he describes Donald Trump to the MSNBC viewers, the network that has inspired two mass assassination attempts.
And there's no question that Donald Trump has visions, as we saw from his video with the unified Reich, which was a completely knowing and intentional inclusion in that video. Let's be real here. He is paving the way to become a Vladimir Putin or to become an Adolf Hitler or a Kim Jong-un. That's what he wants to be. And all of this is in the lead up to paving the way for him to win this election and then to take over this country and literally to eliminate the democracy that we know.
Literally, he says, to eliminate the democracy we know. MSNBC is trying to get Donald Trump assassinated. They're not brave enough to admit it, but it's actually what's happening here. They really do want Donald Trump assassinated, and they've already inspired two mass assassination attempts in this country. Let's not dance around with what they're doing here with their rhetoric. They know they have the power to inspire would-be assassins. They've done it twice. They're hoping to do it a third time. Even if they're not willing to admit it publicly, they would not allow such irresponsible rhetoric on their network unless that was the case. And now they're in a meltdown, as are others at CNN and elsewhere, about Nikki Haley deciding she would vote for Donald Trump. This is the thing that people on the left can't seem to understand. As much as you may despise Donald Trump, a lot of Americans don't like him, but they don't see him as the existential threat that you people have internalized that he is. They don't. Nikki Haley worked for him for almost 4 years. She was in regular contact with him. For those of you, I can't believe she would say these things on the campaign trail and then she would go work for him. Kamala Harris literally accused Joe Biden of wanting to put black people back in chains, just as he did Mitt Romney. She accused him of perpetuating racism and opposing school busing, that he was just like a member of the KKK, and now she's his vice president. It's what politicians in Washington do. The reason that people at MSNBC and elsewhere can't handle this is because they have internalized that Donald Trump is some dark force, and everybody else is like, nope, he's a bit of a goofball, but his policies were pretty pro forma Republican policies when he was president of the United States. Did I agree with him on everything? No. Did I like the byproduct of a lot of his policies? Absolutely. Look at Joe Biden. This is why Democrats are losing. They can't process that most Americans do not despise Donald Trump the way they do, and they can't process that most Americans actually despise Joe Biden's policies. I saw a guy on social media yesterday who was a sociologist. People complaining about food prices going up, and literally he starts with, "Hello, I'm a professor. First indication, D-bag." And then he begins, Actually, the reason food prices are up is because of FDA necessary regulation to ensure the health and safety of the food supply, and you should thank Joe Biden. This is why people want to punch professors, not get lectured by them in class. The left has lost the plot. Many people on the right have as well. I don't know if you know this or not, but I was right yesterday. Even though Joe Biden invited the FBI to search his property for documents, it turns out I was absolutely right. Confirmed by Fox News, the warrant for Joe Biden's house contained the exact same use of deadly force language as the warrant for Mar-a-Lago. The exact same language. You will find as well that the one for Mike Pence's office had the same language as well, was not used because, like Joe Biden, Pence invited them onto the property. Pro forma standard language. But the right decided yesterday to get worked up about they were going to shoot Donald Trump. Damn the facts of the situation. And the left is all upset about Nikki Haley because they were convinced that Nikki Haley was going to come out and join Joe Biden's campaign. There's been all this conversation about Nikki Haley and her voters and her base. And even now you've got people like David Frum in the Atlantic. Nikki Haley may have succumbed, but her voters hold firm against Donald Trump. Have they? Are you really sure about that? She's been getting roughly 20% in all the primaries against Donald Trump. There is a Republican protest vote, and that Republican protest vote, if you go back to 2016, maintained itself. But a lot of those people ultimately decided they would vote for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And the same thing's going to happen here because the Democrats are convinced there's nothing wrong with Joe Biden's policies. The amount of lecturing censoriousness on a daily basis from the Democrats that actually the economy is just fine. I don't understand why you don't like the economy and the high prices because the prices have come down and Joe Biden is to be responsible for that even though he wasn't responsible for the high prices. Little Joe, he's brought down the prices and yay, Joe, you should like him. Why aren't you grateful? They're not grateful because they're not feeling it. They're not grateful. They're not feeling it. And then they look at the world. China today, we all woke up to news. China has surrounded Taiwan with warships. They're probably not going to invade today. Probably not. So Taiwan had two candidates for president. One was let's be friends with China, and one was screw China. And the Taiwanese voters voted for the screw China guy who gave them the middle finger. China's not happy, so they've surrounded the nation on the day the president gets sworn into office with warships as a show of force. The Russians have started using gas weapons in Ukraine to kill the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Joe Biden has built a pier in Gaza to deliver humanitarian supplies, and Hamas is firing at the U.S. soldiers unloading the supplies. There's news out this morning that when John Kerry was Secretary of State, John Kerry blocked investigations into Iranian spies into this country, and when the U.S. Attorney General attempted to confront him, he fled the building so as not to be asked awkward questions as to why the State Department was obstructing an investigation into Iranian spies on American soil. If ever someone could be described a traitor, it would be John Kerry. And this man has been making kissy face with China on behalf of Joe Biden for global warming and climate change. Joe Biden has advanced a Green New Deal that has lobotomized the American economy in favor of China, made us more dependent on China, turned a blind eye to the southern border, allowed a mass wave of humanity across the southern border. It now turns out that the guys who tried to get into Quantico were from Jordan. The FBI is investigating the national security implications. And the media wonders why on earth Nikki Haley would go with Donald Trump over Robert Kennedy or Joe Biden. Here, my friends, is the problem. When you spend all of your time concocting a fantasy story and you tell yourself and begin to believe it's true, you lose touch with reality and those who are grounded in reality. For 8 years now, the media, the left, they've told themselves this idealized story that Donald Trump is a Russian agent, a would-be Hitler, who the Russians installed into office. They stole the election. And Donald Trump advanced Russia's agenda. Never mind that Donald Trump, when he was in office, actually imposed more sanctions on Russia than Barack Obama did. It's a true story. They began to believe the lie. And then they began to convince themselves that the Trump supporters were deplorables. Bitter clingers to their guns and religion. They were deplorable racists. They began to internalize it. They began to believe it. They began to tell themselves the stories that they were morally superior. And along comes Nikki Haley, who campaigns against Donald Trump, runs to be president, says he did a lot of good, but it's time for someone new. He's just too divisive. He says things that don't bring the country together. And in it, they heard themselves. But now she's decided to vote for Donald Trump, and they feel personally betrayed. Because what they were hearing when Nikki Haley was saying, Donald Trump, he did some good, but he's very divisive, and we are going to have a hard time bringing in independent voters because look at how many voters just don't like Donald Trump. Those weren't the conversations the people at MSNBC were having. Those were the conversations that Republicans were having. Those are the conversations with Republicans who recognized they liked Trump's policies, but they didn't like Trump. Nikki Haley turns out to be one of those people, which means Nikki Haley turns out to be representative of a large portion of the Republican Party. And she's come on board with Donald Trump, and you can expect others who say the same things will come on board with Donald Trump because they don't like Donald Trump. I realize there are a lot of you who really like Donald Trump, but you got to understand that a large portion of the public, in fact, I dare say a majority of the voting public, they don't really like Donald Trump. But they're willing to vote for him because of his policies. They're willing to hold their nose and suck it up because they really despise Joe Biden at this point. Joe Biden promised a restoration of normalcy, and instead he handed the country over to the far left. And so people may not like Donald Trump in a way you like Donald Trump, but they're willing to vote for him. The best thing you can do would be to welcome those people with open arms instead of condemning them for daring to vote for Donald Trump and just not liking him. I get this all the time from a lot of Trump supporters. They get mad at me because I say, look, I don't particularly care for the guy, but I love his policy. Why don't you love the man? Do you want me to love him or do you want me to support him? Same with Nikki Haley. And what the left doesn't understand is that they've internalized their hatred so much of Donald Trump, they just can't understand. Most Americans are not poisoned in the mind the way they are. Most Americans just want a safe, free country where the economy works. They had that under Donald Trump. They do not have that under Joe Biden. They remember what it was like 4 years ago, and they'd rather that than this. And the fact that the Democrats and the left can't get this is exactly why Joe Biden is losing.